Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Please take your time and converse more. We have an unusually short Bible study today, so we're in no rush right now. Alrighty, we will slowly get started here. Baxter's out of town, so there's no rules. So we're just gonna study for 3 minutes and go home. Just kidding. We're covering chapter 5 of Esther today, and it's a relatively short chapter, and it's only covering just this one because our next, I guess, 4 lessons are going to be multiple chapters apiece until we finish out the book of Esther. So we don't have a whole lot to cover in this morning, but as we normally do, we'll start off with a brief recap of the past couple of lessons that we have done. I guess 6 of them, I suppose. I think we merged 2 lessons together. Let me flip back to the beginning here. So we started off the book of Esther with the grandeur of Ahasuerus, also known as King Xerxes. We saw with him having his grand drinking party and banquet to show his glory and his riches off to his entire kingdom after failed conquest, to make sure that his people still knew that he was well and in power. During that time, he summoned his queen before Esther, which is Queen Vashti, and she refused to come because it was to show herself off in front of his princes, and she did not necessarily like that or did not want to do that, so she very kindly declined his invitation, and the princes and him did not like that, so they decided to remove Queen Vashti from her position and select a new queen, which we saw in chapter 2. We went through the search for a new queen, where a decree got sent out to all of his lands and provinces. At this time, the Persian Empire stretched from India to Ethiopia. It was a very vast empire, so it took a long time to gather up the potential young brides for Queen Xerxes. After they gathered them up, it took about a year to prepare them through 6 months of spices and perfumes, or 6 months of oil to prepare them to be with King Xerxes so he may select a queen. And then through that process, we see Esther enter the scene with Mordecai being both her cousin and the adopted father, because her parents died. So he brought her, and she was put into the running for to be queen. And then eventually, as we know, Esther was selected to be queen. So she was able to gain favor in sight of King Xerxes. Let's see. Then we see the advancement of Haman. Haman is essentially our main bad guy here, who tries to instill a pogrom against all the Jews to exterminate them. And he was elevated into a higher position to being essentially what is like a modern-day prime minister to King Xerxes. And then we saw in chapter 3 that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage to Haman, which started this pogrom against the Jews because he did not like it. Haman is a very prideful and wicked man with no humility, which we'll get into a little bit today. And then Haman was able to gain the king's favor and set out a decree to essentially instill this pogrom against the the Jews at the set time, which is the 12th month, a month of Adar, which they'll plunder all their possessions. And Haman, to further his position on this, ended up giving 10,000 shallots. I'm trying to think of the 10,000 units of silver to the treasury, which is millions of dollars in today's amount. And that'll pretty much lead us up to this point until we see Mordecai was in mourning in front of the king's gate, which he still is at this point as we start into chapter 5. So if someone would like to start off by reading verses 1 through 5 for us.
Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half my kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared.
Thank you. So you can see here in verse 1, it says, "Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood on the inner court of the king's palace." So you remember back in chapter 4, Esther commanded Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa and start a fast, a 3-day fast, both day and night. Back then it was common for, the Jewish religion to do fasting during the day only, so it's a small period of time, but she wanted both day and night for 3 days. And she also had her handmaids and servants do it with them as well. So on that third day of that fast is when she put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace. If you remember in chapter 4 as well, that to be inside the king's court, you have to be dressed appropriately. You can't come in sackcloth as Mordecai is outside the gate in mourning. You had to be dressed appropriately, and as queen, she had royal robes to put on to go into that court to show off her symbolic nature of being the queen. As we see here, it's when she's in that inner court of the king's palace, it's across from the king's house while the king sat in his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance to the house. So inside the king's gate, he's got his palace, he's got his house, his throne area, so everything that the king does is within this realm. And so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. As we covered last week as well, it was known that if you were not summoned to the court, that you could not just waltz in and get, we have a request to fill or talk to. If the king did not want you there, you were killed on sight. So it was definitely, Esther needed to work up the courage to go in there and actually do this, because as Mordecai presented to her in the last chapter, is you either A, get found out, do nothing about this, get found out when the rest of us are getting killed that you're Jewish, and then you get killed, or you risk it, go to the king and try to gain sight in his favor and try to save us. Queen Esther thought about it for a little bit, and then she decided to go to the king, and as we see here, she found favor in his sight. She also noted that it's been 30 days at this point since King Xerxes has actually summoned her, been with her, or seen her whatsoever. So it is very good that God's providence is with her, that the king saw favor. And obviously God is omnipotent; He can do anything. And He hardened Pharaoh's heart, back when they were still in Egypt, and He can also soften hearts. So it's, He might have softened King Xerxes' heart to make sure that sight and that favor was gained. And so Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. So when she goes in and touches that scepter, she is accepting the grace that was given to her, and essentially, I'm trying to think of the correct word. I don't want to say conceding, but acknowledging the fact that he is the king and he is being, or she is, at his mercy to an extent. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." This is seen also in Mark chapter 6, 23 and 24. That is very common for other kings, or kings in general, to, with a favored subject in their kingdom, to offer up to half their kingdom. Even though half the kingdom would not be given, it was more of a symbolic thing to tell them, like, you have favor in my sight, I will grant your request. Not necessarily, cool, I own, from Ethiopia to India, or Ethiopia to India, I'm going to give you from modern day Iran to India as your kingdom. Now it's more of a symbolic gesture. And so Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." So we can see her request is not, "Can you please stop this this decree that just went out to kill the Jews because I'm also Jewish, so if I have your favor, please don't do this." It was more of, "Let me treat you to a banquet." She was trying to slowly ease into it, trying to not necessarily butter them up, but make sure that that favor is still there. Because if you come up to somebody and ask them, "Hey, can I have $1 million?" They're probably going to tell you, "No, I'm not giving you $1 million." But if you work at it and help them out, I guess, in a way, you might receive that. So the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went out to the banquet that Esther has prepared. So Haman is not there at that time, so he went to go to essentially fetch him and then come over to that banquet. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns, anything they want to know? Awesome, then we'll go right into verses 6 through 8. If someone would like to read that for me.
Sorry, 6 through what?
6 through 8, please.
As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given to you, and what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question."
Thank you. So you can see here, now we're at the banquet. It's a banquet of wine that they were at. And the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request at the half the kingdom? It should be done." So we see that request again, or not really the request. Sorry, it's more of the offering again. So the king is letting her know that, what is your request? Like, I came to your banquet, I will give to you whatever it is that you request. So please, what is it? The king loves wine. We know this, he had a drinking party. He's not necessarily obsessed with it, because we saw before the law of the land at the time is not just drink as you want. It's more of just drinking wasn't. I'm stumbling over myself here. It wasn't necessary to drink as the Romans drank. It was, if you wanted to drink a little bit, you could, kind of in a way. But they still like to have these kind of parties. King Xerxes was very much like to show off his wealth and his status and have banquets in his honor. So when it was just the king and Haman being honored, he very much liked it. And he was very merry with wine at this point when he asked that request again. And then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king said." So now she set up another banquet, another little a party get together with just the king and Haman to essentially butter him up some more, get him going and enjoying being, I guess, way on hosted. Not that he doesn't do it on a normal day, but it's his queen is wanting to do something for him, and his prime minister, which is in the highest position besides being the king. So the first banquet was a fairly mild affair, while Haman sat proudly by the king. Xerxes tried to wheedle Esther's petition from her, and once again he promised her that he would honor any petition that she made, up to half his kingdom. The second time he uses hyperbole to express his generosity. He would not, of course, have granted Esther half his kingdom in any circumstance, which he wanted both Esther and Haman to know how much he was smitten by his beautiful damsels. Remember, she is a very beautiful and attractive woman. She won over all the other, women in the harem. Sorry, yes.
The candidates.
Yep, the candidates, essentially, in a way, which there was many of them. So once again, the queen made it clear that she did not seek the power or the grandeur of the king. She left the impression that she wanted only to be near him. Because again, she has been away from him for 30 days, so she, at this time, is given that impression that she just wants to be near her king. Yes, ma'am?
The thing of it is too, that he's offering half his kingdom to her. I mean, she's the queen, so really and truly, what power would she have if she did have half the kingdom? I mean, I'm not sure about that myself, but I mean, that's a lot to offer somebody, is half your kingdom that he would be willing to give to her. So he was very much smitten with this lady.
Absolutely, yeah. She wanted to show up, or he wanted to show off that generosity to her. And at the time, Queen Esther would have had no real power. Her position was just strictly symbolic whatsoever. She couldn't really necessarily go out and do any ordering people around or making decisions at the time. Anything that would get left the prime, the prime minister type position, and he had the high priest or prince, being Haman. See, I think there's one more thing I wanted to note in here. All right, so like a trapeze artist who saves his most difficult stunt until the last and then fails on his first try, Esther may have been teasing the king and Haman, presenting her final request so the king could see the product of his prime minister's work. Her delay had the desired effect. Haman relaxed. He congratulated himself in the presence of family and friends, and the story of Esther has its desired effect on modern readers and on Jews scattered throughout the world, because the fall of the thoroughly evil man comes to the height of its self-image importance. The author of Esther knew what to include and what to leave out. So let's get into the next little section here on, verses 9 through 14. We'll finish out the reading of the chapter, and then we'll get into the banquet and what comes next in the next chapter. So if someone wants to read 9 through 14 for me.
Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house and sent to his friends and his wife. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king. Yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife said, and all his friends, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it, and go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made.
Thank you. So we see a small glimpse into the life of a truly prideful and wicked man who's going home after this banquet at which Haman and the king were at, where it was noted as just them and a few other high officials, but it was mostly just for those two in their honor. And so Haman went out that day joyful with a glad heart, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, that he did not stand or tremble before him, that he was filled with this indignation against Mordecai. So Haman was having a good time at this party. He was enjoying himself. He was being honored. And yet again, he comes across Mordecai, who is still mourning outside the gate. He's not bowing. He's not trembling in fear as he wanted. And he just gets upset. He gets angry. He gets mad. He says he restrains himself when he went home, where we see the first instance of his wife, Zeresh, being mentioned. But he is so prideful that he lets one tiny little thing once again be his stumbling block and bring his downfall. You saw before that he got elevated to being a prime minister, and because one person didn't bow to him, that he now wants to eliminate, an entire group of people, which is absolutely ridiculous. And then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted, and how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. So because of the small little thing that, again, he wasn't getting bowed to by Mordecai, he is going home and bragging about all of his great riches and his status to his own family. So his wife and his children are there, and he's essentially bragging to them about how awesome he is to make himself feel better. And moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. So again, he's noting the fact that it's just him and the king to this banquet that's being hosted. So he is feeling very prideful and very happy. It says that he went out joyful with a glad heart because he knew that his status, his ultimate what he wanted was a high position, power, and riches. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So again, we see that Mordecai is still mourning at the gate as commanded, and it avails him nothing as long as he sees Mordecai there. He wants nothing more but to get rid of them. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, and then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so that he had the gallows made. So again, we see that because he didn't bow, now his wife is suggesting maybe you should just put a gallows and hang him, because that would be better to finish up this position instead of seeing him every day, which I gotta say, it's probably pretty bad advice, to have that going on. It says that the gallows built to be 50 cubits high, which is roughly about 75 feet. You guys remember a couple months back when Baxter was measuring out what a cubit is from the wrist to the elbow. He had a lot of things figured out, which I don't remember. I just remember him up here showing that off, how to measure with it. So it's about 75 feet. So it's a pretty tall gallows. It's pretty high up, so pretty much everyone around can be seen. And this gallows is being built essentially at his house, outside, for everyone around to see. So this thing pleased Haman, and then they built the gallows. Now, so the first time Zeresh's wife enters the story, Haman boasted to his family and friends, as we noted, that Jesus would later tell his disciples, whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be the first shall be slave of all. For even he, the Son of Man, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many, which is noted in Mark chapter 10, verses 43-45. In spite of Jesus' words, humility was not highly prized virtue in either the Persian or the Roman Empire. Only slaves or poor and helpless people were humble. Jesus died the death of a humble man, and Haman did not care to know what humility was about. He is not humble. He is not a good man. He's very prideful. He's very wicked. He's evil, and he wants nothing more, essentially, to be in very high status and to kill the Jews. To remember that Haman, as an Agagite, comes from King Agag from back in the day, and everything that he does is very much rooted in that. A couple of verses to note throughout the Bible, essentially on being humble and showing humility. We have James chapter 4, verse 10, which is humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Luke 14:11, for all those who exalt themselves to be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. James 4, 6-10. I don't have that one up on here, unfortunately. 1 Peter, chapter 5, verse 6, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, so that the proper time he may exalt you. On and on and on. There's many verses in the Bible that talks about humility, which Mordecai is showing. Very much to note that if you humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, the proper time he may exalt you. So the humility that Mordecai is showing, he will be exalted down the road, but with no humility being shown by Haman, he very much is about to reach his demise in our next lesson. Does anyone have any comments, questions, anything to note at all? Yes, Jesse.
I think it's interesting in Haman that he let a small thing interrupt his whole life. He had it made, basically. He was next to the king, he had family, he had everything, but one little thing, he let that get in the way. He became obsessed with it. And I think sometimes we can let things be obsessive. We can be obsessive about things and not realize the blessings that we have and be upset about something we don't have, or some little something somebody did to us or said to us or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't let that happen.
Absolutely. It's a very important lesson that is shown in here. I think, can't remember if it was last week or 3 weeks ago, I kind of mentioned a thing about you got $72,000, someone steals $20 from you. Are you going to spend the other $72,000 to get that back? No, you're probably not. So if someone does something to you that upsets you for 20 seconds that day, don't throw away your entire day, going about that. Like you said, there's too many things that you have going good for your life that it's easy to overshadow the many goods when one bad thing happens. I think we covered that a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago. One of Baxter's lessons from one of the sermons, when we talked about that specifically about, I'm trying to think exactly what that was on. My brain is tired and things are slipping on my mind these days.
Count your blessings.
Yep, count your blessings essentially. Make sure that you keep in mind the good things that are happening to you and don't let one bad thing overshadow the many blessings that are put on you. Thank you, Jesse. Yes, ma'am.
It's like Jesse said, though, there's people in the world and even in the church who get angry at somebody and keep that anger in their heart for their lifetime, and they've missed out on so many other things. And my dad used to say to me, he'd say, well, you can be angry and you can stay angry if you want to, but that person doesn't even remember what they did. And they're going on about their business. He said, you need to learn to put that away and go on, and forgive that person. Because that's, you have to forgive, but if you can't, then you stay in that turmoil with yourself all the time.
Absolutely. It's a very important thing is forgiveness, and we are commanded to forgive as well. Is when you're praying for things for yourself, you should also be asking for forgiveness of your sins and forgiveness of others who are doing wrong or sinning against you as well, which is also outlined in the model prayer that Jesus laid out for us. It's very important to have that forgiveness and not keep that anger goes away. Remember your blessings. Exactly. Anyone else?
The deal with Haman is it's not that someone has done something wrong to him. He's trying to grab so tightly to control and wanting to have every little aspect of what he thinks is supposed to be, that the fact that one person doesn't grovel in his presence is enough to send him on this whole thing where he has to spend the rest of his day after he's been personally invited to a banquet by the queen and with the king, and all his plans are carried out, he has money, he has all these things we've talked about, and yet one person just acting like themselves in his presence, and he's on this complete tirade.
Exactly.
This one person just sitting at the gate mourning, not doing anything especially annoying or saying, speaking out against Haman and his plan. He's just sitting there mourning, and this is enough to set him off his entire game.
I couldn't agree more. It's very well put. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think too, in a sense, this shows that a person's conscience can really wear on you. I think something was telling him what he was doing was wrong. Inside, not that a voice or anything, but I think that's why he acted the way he did.
Yeah.
And I think we all can feel that if we, in an argument, said something we didn't really mean or spoke too loud or yelled or something, later you do feel humble. You think, well, why did I act like such an idiot?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's life though, that's human nature. God gave it to us and we just have to learn how to control it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and showing that humility is very important when you do something wrong, and it's also very important to seek that forgiveness afterwards and apologize afterwards if it definitely warrants it, because it can sit there and just eat at you and tear you apart. And it's easy to forget our many blessings that are given to us when you have that one thing that's constantly eating at you. Very well put. Anyone else? Awesome. Then we will go ahead and kind of close this out for our Bible study today. Next week might be a little longer, as we are going to be covering all of chapter 6, and I think also all of chapter 7 is in our next lesson. So we're getting into kind of a lot more of area to cover. We're going to be going on about our second banquet, and then about Haman being ordered to honor Mordecai. We're going to see that kind of backfire a little bit on him. And then, let's see, yes, we're covering all of chapter 6 and chapter 7 next week. So we will kind of touch that more then. So we'll go ahead and close, like I said, a little early, but we got more time for fellowship today. Thank you, everyone.